With the loss of the HMR record-keeping app, many of us are faced with the question of how to best track our progress with the behaviors that most influence our calories, our weight, and of course our health, your record keeping. Now, we do have some options, which is good, but how you keep records really is a matter of personal preference. Maybe you like the CoachCare app. If so, fantastic. Alternatively, we have some members who really like MyFitnessPal or the Lose It app. These apps have lots of bells and whistles if you want them. But for other members, these apps just aren't simple enough. We have yet other members who have shifted to one of the counting or tally apps from the different app stores that are available. But still, there seem to be some extra steps required to get your full week's data at a glance, as we had with the original HMR app. And we've also had a member, thank you Laura, who's developed the steps for creating your own form in the Notes app on the iPhone. So for you Android users, please consider this an invitation to come up with the steps for those of you who use an Android. So those are the digital options at this point, and we'll keep sharing what people come up with for those who really want to track on their phones. Having said that, if you're not committed to using your phone, we would ask you to consider going old school. I mentioned this in our previous record-keeping video. We have a long history of pen and paper record-keeping throughout the years. Here's the original from the 80s. Look at that, back when we only tracked calories in minus calories out. And here's the version that we used for most of our history in the 90s and throughout the 2000s. And here's a 1 week at a glance version. Many people used this before the phone app was developed. But notice, particularly in the earlier versions, there are several weeks on one page. And we think there's some real value there. So if you're not totally committed to the phone for your tracking, and if you are, that's great, go for that. We are recommending that you go old school with our Next Step weekly summary form. And we've made some updates to this form, and we think that it's going to be a more useful and more effective tool for your daily tracking. Now, before I show you these improvements, this did have us questioning whether going old school is a concept whose time really has come. Or come back, should I say. Is it, in fact, time for you to go old school?
Old school.
If you're going to go back to pen and paper records, as many of us are, why stop there when you can go old school elsewhere too? For example, have you ever gotten frustrated with GPS as you're driving? And it has you driving in a repetitive square around the perimeter of your destination? Well, maybe it's time to go old school.
Old school.
And embrace maps again. Yes, maps for everybody. And then you can spend the 10 minutes that you save in driving trying to unsuccessfully fold the map back to its original shape. That's old school. And while we're on this, you're not still using a dryer to dry your clothes, are you? Isn't this one obvious? It's such an opportunity to go old school.
Old school.
And ditch the dryer for the joys of the clothesline. That's right, the clothesline. And while you're saving about a penny a minute in electricity, yes, by going old school.
Old school.
Okay, look, clearly these are ridiculous examples because of how inefficient they are, but with record keeping, we think that going old school with the 4-week weekly summary form may actually add some efficiency to your weight management and certainly support your productivity in the long run, because the Next Step weekly summary form gives us some advantages. First, as I mentioned, you always see the week at a glance, but also 4 weeks at a glance. Think about this for a minute. The extent to which you're connected to your progress, connected to your program, directly relates to the next food choice you make or your next decision about physical activity or exercise. Being connected to the program, to your program, is so important. And here, every time that you log a successful behavior, a shake, a veggie, a fruit, about a physical activity, you're not only reinforced in that moment, that behavior is now connected, again, right then to your whole effort at a glance. It's all right there in front of you. Now, this was always a huge value of the 4-week weekly summary form through the years, but it may have even more value today as we all battle a food culture that, as we talk about every week in our sessions, truly is more overwhelming than ever before. Okay, next advantage. We've made certain columns wider now so that you could track your behaviors throughout the day on the form. Earlier versions didn't give some of us enough space to track, for example, fruits and vegetables or multiple bouts of physical activity, and then to subtotal them throughout the day. Well, now you have the space to do that. Next, we decided pretty quickly to keep the midweek subtotal row each week. This can be a very supportive and eye-opening accountability after the first 3 days of every week. It just gives you a pause to assess your progress and decide either on one hand, hey, I've got to keep this behavior going, and there's some real value in that, or on the other hand, hey, I got to pay attention to this area or that area a little bit more than I am. And I think the value there is also obvious. So if you decide to take our new weekly summary form for a spin, we think you'll experience what we're talking about. Simply feeling like you're more firmly in the cockpit, so to speak, or the control room of your weight management with your hands on more of the dials. Now, the only question here is where will you keep your weekly summary form so that you always know where it is? And that's a real question to consider so that you're not spending extra energy looking for it. We expend enough energy on all the other stuff for weight management. We don't need to add to it, let's be honest. For me, it's in my phone case. When I'm out and about, I just fold it in quarters and that's where I keep it. And if I'm home, it goes in the same drawer in the kitchen every time, no exceptions. And no precious energy being spent looking for my lost form. So, what's going to work best for you? Are you going to keep records on your phone with an app? Great. Or are you ready to take the leap? Or should I say leap back and go old school?
Old school.
You decide.